Good morning, track 2. Did everybody have a good time last night? Thanks for showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning on day 2. This is always an early slot. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Rami McCarthy with his lightning talk, You Are Not Netflix, How to Learn from Conference Talks. This talk is sponsored by sponsor Red Canary. They're just outside if you have a minute. Take some time to visit the sponsors, collect things from their booth. Nobody wants to mail anything back.
Thank you. Okay, You Are Not Netflix, How to Learn from Conference Talks. Again, thank you to everyone who hosted happy hours last night, for the folks who are still in their hotel rooms watching this on recording. It's 9 a.m., which means we start with audience participation. This is your fair warning. You will make me look bad. You will hurt my feelings if you don't engage. So I'm going to ask for shows of hands. The hands go up. They stay up. I will let you know when they can go down. Thank you. So raise your hand if you've given a conference talk. Oh my God, I have too many slides. Okay, raise your hand if you've written a blog post. I forgot my audience. Yep, hands stay up. Hands stay up if you've shared your experience publicly on Twitter, Discord, whatever. Cool, keep the hands up if you've always been 100% honest with people, you've given the whole context, you've told the whole truth. You either normally lie to people or you're lying to me right now. The work we do publicly as security people has to be really carefully presented, really carefully couched. Some of this is organizational, some of this is technical, some of this is social, some of this is about risk. And frankly, the thesis for this talk is if public information is always going to be partial. For a variety of reasons I'll cover, you never get the whole truth, the whole context, everything you need to know from people's public work. What can we do about it? How can we adjust? How can we prepare ourselves? And how can we handle this situation so that we actually bring back value to ourselves, our organizations, when we go to conferences like this and see really cool talks and attend happy hours? Hi, I'm Rami. I'm a security researcher at Wiz. Before that, I worked other places. 3 out of 4 of my jobs have been through Forward CloudSec. So check out CloudSec Forum on Slack. Go get yourself a new job if you want it. I also advise some startups. None of this is super relevant, except for the fact that I am a regular attendee of Forward CloudSec, and that means I get this talk as an opportunity to be a little navel-gazy. So I'm going to be doing a lot of referencing people who are going to be glaring at me in this room. I'm going to be doing a lot of talk about Forward CloudSec talks. And despite all that, I want to say that it's kind of funny because this is a conference where I think people try really hard to be more honest, more vulnerable, give more context, be more nuanced. And so a lot of my feedback here is maybe more relevant for what you're seeing elsewhere than what you'll see here yesterday and today. Oh no, Chris. Okay, thank you. Chris is setting me up here with this clicker, thank you. So why aren't conference talks truthful? If you're just gonna accept my premise that people don't share everything they know, in a conference talk they don't give you all the context, what are the underlying causes here? Well, some of it is you give a conference talk, you would like to be accepted to give conference talks, and sometimes you have to really pitch that you did something incredible, innovative, or maybe you don't have to, but you feel like you have to. And then when you present, you want to look and sound smart. I'm certainly trying to do that right now. And so you're really struggling with anything that shines negatively on yourself, on your organization. It's also the fact that the truth can be embarrassing or risky. When you're sharing publicly, generally you're bound by contracts. You're supposed to be doing something in service of yourself or your business. And that means often we can't talk about some of the rough edges, whether those are rough edges of organizational dynamics or rough edges of the tool we ended up building and why it didn't work. And frankly, the underlying thing is that we only have so much time, and you're never going to download your entire context for a system you built, a problem you solved during a conference talk. So you have to pick and choose what you feel like the important things for the audience to know are, and hopefully people are picking and choosing some of the drawbacks, some of the things that make these talks less applicable to everyone. But that's tough because you want your talk to come across as something that everyone should attend and learn and know. So I don't want to pick too much on any specific talks, although I'll do that later. So these are like contrived examples of what I mean when I say that talks are lying to you. And like, this is not here to like hurt anyone's feelings or sling any mud. These are not like I took a talk and removed the name and came up with the example. That being said, I've seen many of these. So like talks you see someone talking about like a cool break glass system they built at the organization, and they just have a long talk exclusively about that. And it's not about the fact that like, why are you accessing prod, right? It's not this context of like, we needed break glass for reason X, Y, or Z. You have like talks about the joys of multi-cloud, like multi-cloud will solve your resiliency, but often it's about kickbacks and contractual obligations and relationships and acquisitions and M&A. You have talks that are about a specific tool, right? Like they bought something really cool and they used it to solve a cool security problem, and they're not going to mention like who the intro came from or like what discount they got. Or there's like some really cool technical problem to solve that probably isn't tied to risk. It's tied to like whatever a leader saw in the news the week before. So other examples, right? There's a lot of talks about CI/CD. I would love to give one someday. The talks about like rolling your own CI/CD or moving it on-prem are often because you're using vendors that you don't trust anymore, or maybe you're going back to SaaS because Jenkins keeps ending up on the internet. There are talks where it's like assumed that what they built is cost effective because they're telling you that this was great and you should build it too. But it's only cost effective because of like how they think about cost in their business, and actually it was all externalized on some other team or business unit. There are talks that reinvent a wheel and you go up after and you're like, oh, this is so cool. Had you seen like other GitHub project? And probably not before they built the thing, and they wish they had. And like there are talks that focus on build. It is, we looked at the landscape of vendors and here's a couple of reasons why they didn't work for us. And they're not going to tell you all the reasons why they can't use certain vendors. But it's not just about these lies. Like I think these are pretty blatant, where people sometimes give these talks knowing that they have to leave something out. I want to share this technical achievement, and I can't talk about the why necessarily because it brings something complicated for my organization. So it's beyond outright misdirection, and this is where we can get into like more concrete, real examples from friends. Because even if they're not lying to you, it doesn't mean they should copy them. Like a big takeaway is that I often see people taking conference talks and assuming it's something they should go build. And there are a lot of conference talks, especially at deeply technical conferences, that describe systems that you should not copy, that would make no sense for you, wouldn't be cost effective, have predicates you don't have. And so here's how we come to Netflix, right? Title of the talk, You Are Not Netflix, because we all want to get accepted to conferences and name dropping helps. But this is a really cool set of work from folks who may or may not be in the room, sorry, around Netflix's multi-cloud architecture. And so I think a lot of folks at this conference may have seen that Netflix has a really cool model they've like presented a lot with AWS about, where you segment out identity into one account and compute into a different account, and you can have your data living somewhere else. And like, this is very cool. I think if you ask them, they would not tell you to go and build it. It is not cool for you, it is cool for them. They have to do it, you don't. They have 10 years of data gravity. They have enormous, enormous numbers of resources that start to blow out account service limits. They have systems that are already in place and they have to live with, and so they have to make these complicated, challenging, innovative choices. And you are not always complicated, challenging, or innovative. Like if you are in 3 AWS accounts with your one SaaS product, you're probably fine. And you probably have architectural patterns open to you that they no longer do. And here's where we come to Chris, who's an organizer of this conference, and Antiope, which I just pronounced right. Excellent. So Antiope is a thing Chris shipped that I thought was super cool. It's a distributed system that uses effectively a whole bunch of lambdas to collect inventory information, centralize that data, and make it operational, right? Very cool. We all have distributed data. We all have distributed systems. But like, he also has given, there's a blog post on this, doesn't mention all these drawbacks and reasons, but like, the reasons they built this at the time were cost considerations, were because they have a huge distributed organization, was because they had a bunch of requirements that you probably don't have. And so you going and rolling this sort of distributed Lambda-based inventory system isn't necessary in 2025. Like, there are better products, there are cheaper products from the first parties, from the third parties, there are open source options, there are better patterns. And so like you can rediscover talks and forget that many things have changed. It can be really hard to figure out like what predicates are crucially important that you need to double check, right? Like you need to revisit. An example from Forward CloudSec last year, Yuba disaster, super cool talk, super cool engineering achievement, Yuba keys for emergency break glass access. And I was watching this talk, and this example means one of two things. It means that either this was a talk that did the draw the rest of the owl thing, where they talk about using Yuba keys for break glass access, and then they point to an open source product that does all of the like PKI bits that had already been set up that you have to build on. So either it's like, this talk is great, but step one is a whole lot of sophisticated infrastructure at your organization. And if you don't have it, you can't easily do Yuba disaster. Or it means I don't understand PKI, and this is easier than it looks, and like these are both valid. So like, what do you do when you're watching a conference talk? Like, what are the questions that should be running through your mind so you can try and catch some of these traps and like, read between the lines? Well, the first one, we talked about like it's not 2018 anymore. Is this still relevant? Netflix, when they built RepoKid, which is an IM tool, they had Aardvark, which basically screen scraped Access Advisor. Access Advisor has APIs now. This is not relevant to you. Are there organizational dynamics? Like, this is a big one with cool technical build talks. You often see that they allied the fact that like buying was not an option for some reason that is not about the best choice for the business. It's about whether people feel like buy is always worse than build, whether we're an engineering culture, whether we have extra headcount that we might as well use, right? There are all these reasons why you can go do a build project, and a lot of those reasons aren't gonna make it into the talk. A big thing that gets me is that a lot of the time, these talks have an inciting problem, right? It's like you come up on stage, like I'm giving this talk because I keep watching people try and copy conference talks that are not relevant to them. There's an inciting problem I'm trying to solve. You may not have that same problem. And this is a like brand new idea I've had that totally hasn't been floating in the ether and doesn't have this 2014 example from Dave Shackelford about rethinking the security con. This is a great blog post. I love when I can dig up something from like a decade ago that is relevant to what I'm talking about. You go to conferences and you hear about really cool systems being built, really cool problems being solved, and your organization really should be worrying about your public S3 buckets, right? Like, just you need to walk in knowing what your risks are and walk out without changing your mind just based on new shiny. Another big problem with talks in security is that we're bad at statistics. I mean, everyone's bad at statistics, but in security, you often give a conference talk where it's, there's some data presented, there's some anecdata, there's a stat pulled from somewhere. This is a really good talk, Myths and Lies in InfoSec, that dives into some of the really common bad numbers you see bandied around. And so like, when you're watching a talk, if someone says 66% of cloud instances are caused by leaked IAM keys, right? Like, where are they getting that stat? Is it from the AWS report? Is it from internal data? Is it based on the fact that they looked at news reports from the past year, right? Like, where are these numbers coming from and how much should you trust them? And there's like what I think of as a marketing substance matrix. I have no problem being marketed to through conference talks, right? Like if it's 10% marketing and 50% something super cool, I'm all in. But you have to stop and think about like what percent of this is marketing, what percent of this is meant to be useful to you. Sponsor talks are often like maybe a little bit of a yellow flag where that's a sign they didn't have to go through a CFP process necessarily. And another thing is a lot of talks just like focus right down their paved road of what they did and why they did it, and they don't talk about alternatives, or they talk about alternatives within the build, buy, adopt framework only. So like we compared this open source tool to 3 others, and here's why we picked it. Does not address whether they should have just bought a solution there or built something from scratch. CSPMs are a great example. Like, some folks have talked about buying a CSPM, and they don't talk about whether open source ones would do. Some folks have talked about building their own, and they don't talk about like whether it was cost considerations or unique architecture, or the fact that they are a company that already has a data lake with all of this in there. And like, what does the talk show you? A lot of security talks just show you something they built or a program they developed at their company, and they don't talk about the actual process to get there, and especially they don't talk about the outcomes. So you have these security talks that pitch you something, and if you went and implemented it, what do you end up with? You end up with a whole bunch more findings in some sort of issue tracker, and does that move the needle? I think also like a big thing to call out, and something I'm guilty of, is that you give a talk like when it's fresh in your mind, when you have something interesting you've done and want to share. You don't want to wait 3 years to see if this system you built was useful or not, right? You just are excited you did it. And so again, great statistics here. Sources, I just feel this way, but like, people often give these talks about really complicated systems that would be amazing if in 5 years they have shown value and been expanded on, and then they leave the company in a year and no one internally can support it, and by goes the system and they end up buying something. So I want to call out what good looks like, right? Like, we don't want to be exclusively negative here. A lot of people do a really good job coming into conference talks and trying to cover a little more of this context and color, whether it's organizational, whether it's things they've done wrong. So one is from Will and Devon from HashiCorp. They give the talk on the journey of scaling IAM in a SaaS company over 5 or 6 years, right? All the decisions you make at a moment in time that are right, like, we're gonna do granular roles, we're gonna do absolute least privilege. Okay, we're gonna roll back and we're gonna do just-in-time access, we're gonna do resource-based access, we're gonna do intent-based access, right? They give the talk that shows the bumps along the way. And then Jacob Selassie talks about scaling an AppSec program in a similar way, where he talks about like the life cycle of building a partnership program and all of the things they did that were right at the time, but he stuck around long enough to have to change. And so like the difference between folks who talk about a moment in time is you really have to extrapolate out and decide whether you think this will still be useful in a couple years, whether it will show value or not. So like, what do we do about this? Okay, like awareness of the problem is always the first step. I think just begging you all to come into talks with a problem to solve of your own instead of assuming that the problem is universal, thinking about what context you should pull out. Those are like, okay, light vibe-based advice. But there's some concrete stuff, right? Like beyond going in with your eyes open, know your problems, seek solutions, especially forward CloudSec. Like, this is why I find this such a good audience, is because there are, 40 talks at Forward CloudSec? And if you just go and treat it as a buffet of things to bring back to your security team, you're gonna be sending them like a mix of cool vulns and issues in OCI and complicated PKI-based implementations for multi-cloud, right? And if you didn't come to Forward CloudSec with those problems, you're not adding a ton of value. You're not getting as much as you would as if you came here with some specific concerns on IAM or some specific concerns on scaling multi-cloud. And then use talks as a resource to answer your questions. Don't just let the talks lead you by the nose. Connect with speakers personally, like all conferences, but especially conferences like this. Write your list of questions about like, hey, did you guys really do a build versus buy here? Did you just have to build this for some reason? Hey, like, you talk about this working with engineers system, how'd that go in practice? Like, hey, I just checked and this open source project is deprecated on GitHub, is it still relevant, right? Like, get in the details, ask questions. People are generally happy to answer. The thing with me, like calling all speakers white liars is like, they don't want to hurt you. Like, this is not people being bad actors. They just are hoping that you come ask them that question that they can then give you the context you need. Like the number of conversations at Forward CloudSec I've had where someone builds a cool system and I get 3 or 4 pieces of information that help me implement it or help me understand it's not for me, is like every talk I've ever taken back to my company. And then, of course, this is Forward CloudSec. It's a practitioner conference, but it's also a conference where we're all here to participate. You all raised your hands. You're already giving talks. Give talks. Give better talks. Be a little more vulnerable. Be willing to talk about some of the challenges. Think about if there's something you can talk about that's been cooking for 4 years, instead of like just whatever the new shiny you built is. And be really willing to take that risk of maybe over a happy hour, maybe after your talk in the side hallway, telling people the real details, because security is really hard and it gets harder when we tell each other to like build complicated systems or do things that don't work because we're trying to relearn the same lessons over and over again. So that's all I've got. Looking forward to hearing feedback about context I should provide for my talk afterwards. If you want more from me, WizBlog has a bunch of stuff. These slides are live already on SpeakerDeck, so that link has all the slides if people need to click links. And thank you.
So we have a few minutes for questions. I'll run a mic to you.
Thanks, Rami. I'm curious what advice you have. What advice you have for conference organizers that either post guidelines for CFPs or review CFPs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on the conference. Conferences have different goals. Like Forward CloudSec is designed as a practitioner conference that brings you things back that are actionable. AWS reInvent or Reinforce, right, is designed to show you what new is coming from a vendor. And then you have conferences that are about giving people an opportunity to learn and connect. So it depends on the conference. For a conference like this, I think that it's really imperative that as we develop these talks, as we coach people through giving these talks, we sort of push them to give a little more of that context. Because the talks here are often diving right into the technical details. We're skipping the 101. But what we're also skipping often is the why. Like the why will be a technical problem instead of an organizational context. So I think like during CFPs, there's a thing with CFPs where you always should like give a really robust outline if you want to get accepted. It helps a lot because they can trust that you don't just have an idea, you have a talk track. And I think asking as part of that for folks to be a little more thoughtful about like who this is useful for. It's a common question on a CFP. They say like, who will this talk be relevant for? And you say like intermediate cloud practitioners. And like, don't do that. Like ask more specific questions about like what problem you solved with this talk if it's in a tool track, or how long this program's been running, or what we can learn. And that being said, I think it's much more about building a community where that's the norm. Because you do have to have a lot of trust in the audience if you're going to expose your back like that and say, look, I'm going to show you something, and by the way, we tore it down 6 months later, and I still think we can learn from that.
Other questions?
So two things here. So I think like people, since it's a practitioners conference, like they don't want to give the context. They feel like they want to dive right into the technical solution. And so what's your thoughts on bringing the STAR interview method to conference talks?
I wouldn't bring the STAR interview method. I think that that's probably too much depth. But like, I think even if you only take 1% of your talk time, like there was this slide from Chris. Chris has a blog post for anti-IP, and the blog post does not mention any of these reasons why they built it, right? And like, you can put one slide that says, here's a few things you should know about me and my company before you give me the technical solution. And you can also see at the end, here's a few questions you should ask me after the talk, right? Like, ask me about the engineering effort to build this. Ask me about the cost of this, right? Things you can't say live or on record, but you're happy to discuss more.
Kind of going off of that question, I'm a newer speaker. Would you ever propose like a nice outline that we could follow to help make better conference talks, like when we're creating our slides?
If I had thought of that, that would be a great inclusion in a talk like this. You should give that talk. Someone should bring that back. No, I think it is really, though, about that one slide of why we built this system when you're building a system, or why we built this program when you're building a program, right? Not all problems are solved with technical systems. And I think it's also about stopping and like asking yourself the questions I outlined, and like making sure you know the answers and whether they really deserve to be included. Because I think people should really stop and think. If you built a system exclusively due to budgetary constraints, you should be very careful about how you advocate for other people to build that system. Because you get these bombastic advertisements for like, go build your own CSPM that just lead people down the wrong road when you internally are really unhappy with the consequences of your actions.
I'll ask a question, which is how often do you see that a presentation drifts very, very far away from the abstract that was submitted to the conference? And what advice do you have for new speakers on how to make sure they deliver on their promise for talks?
Yeah, so no one trusts me with a CFP review, so I actually, I can only assume when I see the abstract announcement and then I see the talk that maybe some drift has happened. I think the big thing for me is I actually have open sourced on my personal website a bunch of the CFPs I've sent into conferences, and if you go look, you'll see that I write incredibly in-depth outlines. Like, I don't submit to a conference until I have most of the talk track, and then of course I spend a ton of time on the slides later and polishing the narrative. But I think that if you are a speaker who's concerned about that risk, if you are a newer speaker, you can assume that like everyone just sends in their abstract and their title, and they don't. People put in a lot of thought to trying to outline their whole talk and what what the takeaways will be, what some of the key references are. And so I think the more you pull that forward into your CFP, the more you're de-risking disappointing your audience. And I think for me that's a huge thing. Like, maybe it's the imposter syndrome, but whenever I'm giving a talk, I want to give them everything possible to turn it down if it's wrong for the audience or they're not excited about it. Like, I don't want to get accepted to a talk that's going to go poorly. I want to get accepted to talks that people will enjoy. So I think that like you can de-risk that by pulling stuff forward into the CFP. And you can also go back and like compare notes, but sometimes things change and you have to just roll with it.
All right, well, it looks like there's no more questions, so give one more round of applause for Rami.